A massive, highly venomous web-building spider sits perfectly still, heavily armed and incredibly dangerous. It is the ultimate ambush predator, instinctively ready to violently kill absolutely anything that touches its web. But today, this terrifying arachnid is completely unaware that it has become the prey. It is actively being hunted by an assassin that is significantly smaller, but infinitely smarter. High above the web, a tiny Portia spider carefully calculates the exact trajectory for a flawless assassination. It extends a single leg and gently plucks the web's silk, perfectly mimicking the rhythm of a falling leaf. The giant spider is instantly confused, turning its heavily armored body away to investigate the false signal. In that exact fraction of a second, the tiny assassin drops silently from the canopy above. It lands perfectly on the giant's blind spot and immediately sinks its venomous fangs deep into the neural center. This is not a lucky strike. This is a highly calculated, pre-planned execution by a true biological genius. Welcome to the incredibly dark and fascinating world of the Portia jumping spider. Deep in the dense, humid rainforests, survival usually depends purely on massive physical size or brute force. Predators evolve larger fangs, heavier biological armor, and increasingly toxic venom to dominate their environment. But the tiny Portia spider took a completely different, highly paradoxical evolutionary path. It abandoned heavy biological weapons entirely and evolved the most dangerous tool in the animal kingdom. It evolved an incredibly complex, highly analytical, problem-solving mind. Portia is a spider that actively hunts and eats other, much larger, highly venomous spiders. Hunting another heavily armed predator in its own web is arguably the most dangerous task in nature. One single misstep, one incorrect vibration, and the tiny assassin will be instantly paralyzed and eaten. To survive, Portia cannot rely on primitive instinct or blind biological aggression. It must actively study its target, analyze the environment, and formulate a highly complex tactical plan. When Portia first spots a massive web-building spider, it does not immediately attack. It sits perfectly still on a leaf, sometimes for hours, using its massive, highly evolved main eyes to observe. These incredibly complex eyes provide high-resolution, telephoto vision that rivals modern camera lenses. Portia actively scans the entire three-dimensional environment, mapping every single branch and leaf. It is looking for the optimal, safest physical route to reach the dangerous target without being detected. Once the highly complex route is fully calculated, Portia begins its stealthy approach. But here is where this tiny invertebrate shatters everything we thought we knew about animal intelligence. To reach the target, Portia often has to completely lose sight of the prey for long periods of time. It must crawl down the tree trunk, cross the forest floor, and climb up an entirely different branch. For almost all insects and arachnids, if a physical object is completely out of sight, it simply ceases to exist. They entirely lack the cognitive ability to remember a hidden target. But Portia possesses an incredibly rare psychological trait known scientifically as object permanence. It holds a highly detailed, three-dimensional mental map of the target's exact location in its mind. It remembers exactly where the prey is, even while walking completely away from it. This level of highly complex spatial memory is usually reserved strictly for mammals and highly evolved primates. Yet, this tiny arachnid manages to achieve it with a brain absolutely no larger than a single grain of sand. After successfully navigating the complex physical maze, Portia arrives at the perfect striking position above the web. But the giant spider below is still highly alert, extremely sensitive to any physical movement. If Portia simply drops down, the giant target will instantly turn and strike with lethal force. So, the tiny genius actively employs psychological warfare and highly deceptive biological manipulation. It carefully steps onto the very edge of the silk web and begins a highly experimental process. It plucks a single silk strand and carefully watches the giant spider's immediate physical reaction. If the giant spider acts aggressively, Portia instantly stops and remains completely motionless. It then actively changes the frequency, trying a different, softer rhythm to manipulate the target. Portia is literally testing the web's acoustics, essentially hacking the giant spider's biological alarm system. It attempts to mimic the exact vibration of a helpless insect trapped in the silk to draw the target out. If the target is too large and dangerous to fight directly, Portia changes its tactical strategy entirely. It actively decides to mimic the gentle, rhythmic vibration of the wind blowing across the web. Or it flawlessly mimics the subtle, irregular tapping of a small, harmless leaf falling onto the silk. It uses this deceptive camouflage to slowly, carefully creep closer to the highly dangerous target. Every single movement is perfectly timed and meticulously calculated to avoid triggering a defensive strike. When it finally reaches the absolute perfect striking distance, the tiny assassin prepares for the climax. It waits for the giant spider to turn slightly, exposing its highly vulnerable biological blind spot. With explosive kinetic energy, Portia launches its tiny body directly through the air. It lands heavily on the giant's back, completely bypassing the massive, deadly fangs of the target. Before the giant spider can possibly react or defend itself, the assassination is already over. Portia sinks its sharp fangs deep into the target, injecting a highly potent, fast-acting neurotoxin. The massive prey instantly goes completely limp, heavily paralyzed by the tiny, brilliant hunter. This incredibly brutal execution was not won by superior physical strength or heavier biological armor. It was won entirely by vastly superior intellect and highly calculated, adaptable tactical planning. The existence of the Portia spider poses a massive, mind-bending paradox for the scientific community. We have always assumed that highly advanced cognitive intelligence requires a massive, biologically expensive brain. We believed that complex problem-solving and mental mapping required millions of heavily connected neurons. But this tiny arachnid actively proves our entire traditional understanding of biological intelligence completely wrong. It packs the complex tactical ability of a highly evolved mammal into a microscopic neural network. It actively thinks, it plans, it experiments, and it learns from its immediate physical environment. It proves that true intelligence is not strictly defined by massive physical brain volume. It is defined by the incredible efficiency and complex architecture of the biological wiring itself. In the dark, highly dangerous undergrowth of the rainforest, the ultimate weapon is not venom or teeth. The ultimate weapon is a tiny, highly analytical mind capable of outsmarting much stronger opponents. The next time you see a tiny spider sitting perfectly still on a green leaf, do not underestimate it. It might not be relying on primitive biological instinct or blind luck to survive in the wild. It might be actively scanning the physical environment, heavily analyzing the complex geometry. It might be silently formulating an incredibly complex, multi-stage assassination plan. Because in the brutal, highly competitive natural world, absolute physical power can easily be defeated. It can be completely dismantled by patience, deception, and a highly calculated tactical strategy. The giant spider died simply because it could not comprehend the sheer genius of its tiny attacker. The Portia spider remains the undisputed intellectual king of the entire incredibly diverse arachnid world. A microscopic mastermind that actively hacks the physical environment to completely dominate its predators. The rainforest is incredibly dangerous, heavily populated by massive, heavily armored biological killers. But the most terrifying creature in the entire jungle is the tiny assassin that thinks before it strikes.